Hello students, here's a little bit of tutorial about the remainder of our chapter on the early Cold War. We've discussed the war in Korea, we discussed how the Cold War began, so here's a little more information on part 3, Averting Nuclear War. Now, much of the home front during the Cold War, the early Cold War in particular, was dedicated to averting nuclear war, or at least being prepared in case nuclear war occurred. Even one of the hallmark programs of the Eisenhower era, the Federal Highway Act of 1956, kept the Cold War in mind. You can see on the screen an early Mixmaster, and all of us who go to Dallas or anywhere are familiar with Mixmasters. And you can see the early construction of a Mixmaster on the interstate highway system. And if you look very close, you'll see that it's designed to make interchanges fast, but you don't see that it's also designed very carefully for trucks, transport trucks, military trucks, even with missiles, to be able to pass underneath as well as over. So this is carefully designed to make it possible for troops to move coast to coast. President Eisenhower, when he had been Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, had been very impressed by the German Autobahn system, a massive highway system that had certainly aided Hitler in his effort to move troops and equipment to the front lines during World War II. So he's very aware of the fact that in the United States, we did not have any kind of connected interstate highway system. So the Federal Highway Act of 1956 is an attempt to remedy that. So every time you go anywhere on our interstate highway system, you can think the Cold War, you can think Dwight Eisenhower for the system that all of us use almost daily and all of us enjoy. And of course, this is a time, the 1950s, 60s, when we become especially attached, even more than we already were, to the individual automobile. The car culture develops, and you also see on the screen, of course, a classic American car, the Chevy, 1957 Chevy. Classic design, one of the most popular cars of the era. There's so many. These are behemoths compared to even today's SUVs. This is when gas is cheap. We're talking, 20, 30 cents a gallon. There were gas wars to drive down the price of gas and competition. So it's a golden age of the car, the highway, low gas prices, domestically produced. So no one's really worried about miles per gallon in this era. What everyone is worried about, though, is the potential for a thermonuclear exchange with the Soviet Union. Because remember, before the end of the 1940s, the Soviets had been able to produce their own atomic bomb. And as we discussed during the Korean conflict, that war almost became an international, it almost became, in other words, a global conflict when the Soviets threatened to use atomic bombs if we used atomic bombs against China. And so there was actually a craze for a brief time for backyard bomb shelters, just like a lot of us wanted backyard storm shelters after tornadoes, after particularly severe tornado seasons. And this is an example of what one looked like. They're pretty stark, utilitarian. They would be buried in the backyard. This one was in one of the first major suburbs outside Levittown in New York. And if you didn't have your own bomb shelter, every town had designated bomb shelters during the Cold War. And you can see what a fallout shelter sign would look like. You can see the yellow triangles inside the black circle. So it's really stood out, and you could find these in every town, every city, no matter how small. I remember growing up as a child in Paris, here in Paris, that downtown, all those old buildings have basements, and every block had a shelter, and you knew where they were. Some of those signs are still, you can still see where they were. If you notice when you go downtown today, and those basements were equipped with blankets and water and canned goods during the Cold War. So there's always this sense that atomic war with the Soviets could come at any time. And this was a very real fear that many had. I'm going to play this public service announcement that many children, in fact, watched at school. So let me play this for you for a few minutes. Bert the Turtle. You have this discussion of Bert the Turtle in your text.
He did what we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you. Duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. This is an official civil defense film produced in cooperation with the Federal Civil Defense Administration and in consultation with the Safety Commission of the National Education Association. Produced by Archer Productions, Incorporated. Hey, Bert, come on out and meet all these nice people. Please? Oh, all right. We really can't blame you. You see, Bert is a very, very careful fellow. When there's danger, this is the way he keeps from being hurt. Sometimes it even saves his life. That's why these children are practicing to duck and cover just as you do in your school. We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Since it may be used against us, we must get ready for it, just as we are ready for many other dangers that are around us all the time. Fire is a danger. It can burn whole buildings if someone is careless. But we are ready for fire. We have a fine fire department to put out the fire, and you have fire drills in your school so you know what to do. Automobiles can be dangerous too. They sometimes cause bad accidents, but we are ready. We have safety rules that car drivers and people who are walking must obey. Now, we must be ready for a new danger, the atomic bomb.
Well, you get the idea. You can watch the entire Duck and Cover public service announcement that many school children saw as a matter of course on YouTube, and again, there's a good discussion of it in your text. That's pretty scary, but by far the scariest period in the Cold War, the event which the world came closest to a real World War III situation, a thermonuclear exchange, was with the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I want to make sure that you know a little bit about the Cuban Missile Crisis. There are many documentaries, movies, books written about this crisis. It occurs, of course, during the next administration, the next presidential administration, that of John F. Kennedy. The 1960s would be the most intense period in the Cold War. We would see the Berlin Wall go up in 1961. We would see the early involvement in Vietnam begin. And we would see, of course, most importantly, the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the Soviet Union began to place thermonuclear weapons, offensive weapons, in Cuba, when Fidel Castro, of course, becomes their communist ally in Cuba. And you can see, go back. I'm having trouble, sorry, with my mouse. I'll just leave it there. You can see Cuba just so close to the Florida coast. This means that the Soviets would have a first strike capability and could hit the United States, major targets, even Washington, D.C., before we would be able to strike back, or at least to launch a major strike back against the Soviets. This cannot be allowed to stand because of the massive potential, if nothing else, for blackmail internationally, diplomatically. You can see what Kennedy does. He responds by blockading the Cuban coastline with the Navy. He also does this with the Air Force. And for about a week, we are literally on the brink of World War III with the Soviets. And no one knows, Kennedy, Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, exactly how this will turn out. There's constant negotiation going on, but it's tough. There's no hotline. There's no direct way for Kennedy and Khrushchev to negotiate, and both are getting advice from their military hardliners that it's time for war. They should just go ahead and have it out. In the end, Kennedy is able to negotiate a settlement, and Castro, who doesn't want war, also is able to back down. And the missiles are removed, and war doesn't come. But it is very much a game of brinkmanship or nuclear chicken, and that is a sobering event. Kennedy will be killed in Dallas, of course, shortly after this event, and before any long-term change really can happen in the Cold War, a real thaw can happen. There have been, of course, multiple theories about Kennedy's assassination, lots of conspiracy theories, but the latest technological studies of the assassination, the latest investigations have put pretty much those theories to rest, and the conclusion now is that Oswald did, in fact, act alone. Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged assassin, did act alone and is the assassin of JFK. November the 22nd, of course, 1963. So with that, we'll stop and